To everyone watching and to our guests today, thank you. My name is Zachary Nelson, and this is the second session of Global Cleveland's 2023 Global Employers Series Summit. And today's topic is on Optional Practical Training, or OPT. Now, the Global Employers Series provides resources on how to successfully engage Cleveland's global talent, and it aims to help fill workforce needs, drive business growth and productivity, and contribute to the economic growth of the region in general. I want to remind everyone that our third Global Employer Series will be on Wednesday, May 11th from 12 noon to 1 p.m. and will be about the various types of work visas available to our international talent. So if you have not done so, please register for this free session on our website. I would also like to thank our generous sponsors, SwageLock, Team Neo, Brown Immigration Law, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, Clockwork 9, and the Greater Cleveland Partnerships. Just for everyone watching, we will be taking questions at the end of the session after the presentation. If you have a question, please send it to me through the Q&A or through the chat. I'd like to introduce Dr. John Holcomb, a member of the Global Cleveland Board and Vice Provost of Academic Programs for Cleveland State University. Dr. Holcomb will be introducing today's host. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Holcomb, please.
Thank you so much, Zach. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce my Cleveland State University colleague, Dr. C.K. Kwai, Director for our International Services and Programs, which we call CISP. CK is an international educator and has held various administrative positions at public and private higher education institutions. His extensive experience in all areas of international education, including international enrollment management, international student and scholar services, intensive English programs, international scholarships, and education abroad. CK's research interest is in the areas of international education and cross-cultural communication management. He holds a PhD in higher education from the University of Minnesota. He is also an adjunct professor at the Vietnamese German University, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. He has taught and presented for the U.S. Department of State, numerous NASFA national and regional conferences, the NASFA Summer Institute, AIEA annual conferences, and various institutions around the world. CK has held numerous professional organizational leadership positions, such as chair of NASFA Leadership Development. It is my pleasure to have CK join us today.
Thank you, John, or I should say Dr. Holcomb. Well, and thank you very much for everyone that is joining us today. I'm actually going to try to keep it as simple and as short as possible in terms of the presentation part, so that you have time to ask questions. And I'm going to kind of deviate a little bit from what Zach mentioned, that I would say throughout my presentation. At any given point, if you are confused or not sure what I'm saying, feel free to quickly put it in the chat and say, please repeat, because occasionally, for those of you that know, right, the government loves acronyms. And sometimes I forget and I slip right into those acronyms and I lose people along the way because they have no idea what I'm talking about. So feel free to just kind of quickly stop because I don't think you can unmute and just say, can you please repeat that? So feel free to just use the chat to stop me, and then I will go back and make sure that I explain. And then what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to share a few short slides, PowerPoint slides, and I will be also at the same time skipping through a few. So I don't want you to get too worried if you suddenly see me skipping through a few slides, because this is, and I will make this PowerPoint available, through Global Cleveland. This is also one that we use for students. So basically the way I want to cover it is information that really pertains to an employer So I'm going to kind of skip through the part that pertains to student, and that is the part that employers generally do not need to know. But if you have spare time and you want to know, you can go through it. So the part for student is really about the process of applying and how they get to the point of getting the OPT or the optional practical training. So, okay, I'm gonna share my screen and let's make sure that it works correctly. Do this. I hope everyone can see the screen. So very quickly, the agenda, I'm going to cover what OPT or optional practical training. Planning for your OPT is the part that I will skip through the majority of it. Preparing and processing your OPT application is the part that I will definitely skip. And then using your OPT and maintaining your F1 status, I will cover the majority of that portion of it. All right, let's get right into it. So OPT or optional practical training. What is OPT, right? OPT is really a 12-month work permission, and this is classified as a benefit by the Department of Homeland Security to F1 students. And basically it's for work or training related to the most recent degree. So for example, if you have an applicant that say had a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and now has a master's in information system. So the OPT, should be the one that is related to the most recent degree, which means it's the master's of information system and not civil engineering. And then, of course, it's a temporary training and or an employment experience. And here it's temporary because it can range from 12 months, 1 year, or you can round it to 1 year, to 3 years or 36 months. And I will come back to that and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, also meeting the eligibility criteria. Okay, so what are the eligibility criteria? So students in F1, which is a non-immigrant status. So this is, like I said, a benefit for F1. They are also students, for example, at Cleveland State that is on a J visa and they are not eligible for OPT. Or sometimes you may encounter a student that is known as being on the M visa. This is usually vocational programs, and they are not eligible for this particular type of OPT. There is a slightly different type. And then, of course, a student must maintain legal F1 status. And then this relates to the very next bullet, not just maintaining, but enroll and maintaining for at least 1 academic year prior to the OPT application. Then, of course, student must complete the new degree program at a higher level. So this is another one of those criteria. So if they are at a bachelor's, that's not the concern at all, right? But if they are at a master's, then it has to be, so they have to complete the master's. They cannot say not complete the master's and fall back into their bachelor's. So that is kind of what it means by completing a higher level. So again, in general, F1 students are eligible for 2 optional practical training. So one can be at the bachelor's level. The second can be at the master's. So it must move up a level. And I'll talk about this. So one of the ineligibility is, as the second bullet, is students are not eligible for OPT after completing a new degree program at the same or a lower education level. So if they say have at some point in the past earned a master's degree, used one of the OPT, and now it's pursuing a bachelor's degree in a different field, even when they complete their bachelor's degree, they are not eligible for OPT because it's not at a higher level. So no going backwards, only going forward. Then, of course, the other is that a student not eligible for OPT if granted, 365 days or more on a full-time CPT. So I understand that on Monday, there was a webinar on CPT, and that it's the immigration terminology, it's curricular practical training, or layman's term, internship, basically. So for full-time internship, if it exceeds or it hits 365 days or more, they are not going to be eligible for OPT. And whenever immigration regulation uses days, they actually count actual days, unfortunately. And Friday and Saturdays, holidays here counts as a day. Okay, so optional practical training. So they are also, in general, two different categories of optional practical training. The most common you see is also known as the post-completion OPT. There it exists, there is a pre-completion OPT. That is an option before completing the degree. We normally do not recommend that, and that is a very, very tricky area to go into because it will subtract from the post-completion OPT. There's a formula that they use to subtract, so we normally do not recommend that. So, but the most common approach that you will see is the post-completion OPT. And that's, of course, after completing of all the coursework for a degree requirement. And this is where I say that it's generally for 12 months, but for students in the STEM field, that it's on the list of qualified STEM field by Department of Homeland Security. There is an option of a 24-month OPT extension. So it can go up to 3 years, or 1 year to about 3 years. And then, of course, there's a third OPT category. Is called the OPT cap gap, and that's exactly what it means, cap gap. And this is for students who have on OPT and have an approved H-1B, which is going to be, I think, the next webinar. And so if it occurs that there is a gap between when the H-1B will start and when the OPT ends, the student can apply for what's called cap gap extension. So those are kind of the general three category or three types of OPT. So post-completion. So things to kind of really remember in general. And this is the part that we normally kind of work with students, but it's just good general information to have, right? Is to review the OPT information and establish an OPT plan. And this is what we tell students to do, right? Prepare all the supporting documents and work with our office in terms of getting all the documents. And this is kind of about what I want to cover, with all of you today, in terms of this part of it. And then I will continue with the rest of the information. This is where I'm skipping through, as I told you. Okay, so what employment qualifies for OPT? And so this is sometimes, the area where employers are a little fuzzy about, right? But in general, you can count on almost any jobs qualifies for OPT. The key is that that position or the job function must relate to the individual's most recent degree. And so, and of course, almost anything you can kind of write it up to be related, depending on how you set up the job description. But in general here, it has to have a direct relation to the field of study, right? And then in terms of the type of employment, that's why I say almost anything, right? So it could be multiple employer. So someone who is on OPT can have, say, 3 or 4 different part-time position. As an example, right? Short-term multiple employers, especially in the performing arts, right? Work for hire contractor, subcontracted work that is eligible. Employment through an agency or consulting firm. Sometimes, for example, those temp companies. So students can also use the OPT to work through a temp company. Self-employed business owner, right? So it can be paid or unpaid. Of course, most individual want it to be paid, but it can be an unpaid position. So, okay, continuing, position can be anywhere in the US. So this is an added information, like the position can be within Cleveland State University, within university, as long as it's not a student health position. Okay, so then what if I don't find a job? So these are just additional information for employers, so that you know, right? And I will show you an example of what the OPT employment authorization document look like, and you can kind of tell. So this is an immigration regulation that students on OPT basically are allowed up to 90 days of unemployment, and that's it. So which means when the OPT starts, they have 90 days to actually secure a job. So that's kind of what that 90 days means, right? So count days, and this is what I mean by anytime you see a regulation that lists days and not say 3 months, means they're counting actual days, including weekends and holidays. And so this is basically, the minimum that I should say the maximum number of days that they can sit idle once the OPT starts. Then, of course, if they go beyond, then it is a violation of the OPT criteria or benefit. Okay, so this is also the part that I'm going to kind of skip through because this is the part that students are basically responsible for. Okay, so this is important in the sense that I think, for as an employer, it is good for you to know that what are the individual rights. So if they basically have applied for a position with you and you like to offer them a position, but their OPT has not been approved yet, or they don't have the actual authorization in hand. So this is good information to have and to know. So question tends to come out as, what are my rights during this time, during my OPT, the pending status? So they basically legally, remain as F, maintaining their F status. They will be considered. They may travel within and also outside of the US. Outside the US here, as long as they still have a valid visa. Of course, they cannot work on the university campus anymore. But at the same time, they really cannot start work with you until they receive the actual employment authorization document. And I will talk a little bit about it. So the employment authorization document, or a lot of times, immigration will just refer to as the EAD, doesn't look, there's no EAD on the actual document, and I'll show you. It's just, I always say all the wonderful things that our government do, right? I mean, they say one thing, and then when it's printed out, it looks very different. Anyway, so, and this is actually information for students specifically, but it helps you to understand how that process works, right? So once it's approved, students can a lot of times go online and look at the status, and the status may say OPT approved. However, it does take sometimes up to 30 days for them to actually receive the actual employment authorization document. And yes, can you actually have the students start work by just using the online status? Technically, there is no regulation that says you cannot. However, we always say you should act on the side of caution because the online is not official. The official notification or the official approval will only come in the form of the employment authorization document, which is the EAD card. And I'll show you an example. So this is an example of what the EAD card looks like. And if you see that red ribbon, it basically say United States or United States of America employment authorization card. It doesn't say employment authorization document. But again, it's basically what the immigration term is in the EAD. And on this card, of course, you have the individual's photo. And then, of course, there's a fingerprint. And then the key, I hope you can see it. There is actually a valid date, valid from, there is a begin date, and there is a card expire, there is an end date. So the 90 days starts from the valid from. So on this particular form, so it says January 1, so which means day 1 is January 2nd will be day 1, January 3rd will be day 2, so on and so forth. So that 90 days starts from right after that valid date. And then, of course, it expires on the day that it will expire. One other quick note for travel, this card will also say not valid for re-entry to US. If the position that you have hired an individual that uses OPT and have this card, and the part of the job is for them that they are required to travel outside of the US, you got to make sure that the individual work with the university because this card alone is not going to allow them to re-enter the US. There has to be other supporting documents for them to be able to re-enter the US if they are traveling. So very, very quickly, like I say, in a quick nutshell, that is kind of it. And this, again, information is regarding the travel. But like I said, this is very strictly pertained to CSU in a sense because we have certain documents or process that we work with students. So I'm not going to go into any detail of it, but I just want you to kind of know that there is a process. Other than that, the other stuff I'm just going to skip through. Actually, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Responsibility during the OPT. When the student is on OPT, there is requirements, and this pertains to employers that have intention or plans to sponsor the individual, and you will definitely hear more about it at the next webinar regarding the H-1B and other possible option. So if there is plan for that, then this part is very, very critical and important because students are still the individual, I should say, they're not really students anymore, but they are on OPT. There are still requirements that they must maintain. For example, they have to make sure that they go into the CBUS or the database system to update the employer's name, address, duration of their employment. If they change employer, that needs to be reported within 15 days of any change. And all that information needs to be kept updated because if they don't, during the process of the H-1B, that is kind of when they get dinged for not meeting or not fulfilling the immigration requirements. So this, they still have to kind of do what they are told to do, and these are the information that, like I said, every student that have gone through the process with us would have and should have received all this information. And the only thing sometimes is that they forget. So other than that, that's really kind of in a quick nutshell the information that I wanted to kind of share with all of you. And I'm open for any kind of question. And I know that there are already some questions. I think I can pull it up. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen.
Yes, there are some questions in the Q&A, and I can read them out. Thank you, CK, for that presentation. I truly appreciate it. And that, yes, a couple of questions have filtered through already, so I'm going to read them out loud one at a time. If you still have a question after that presentation, please write them in the Q&A. We probably have time for up to 5. So I'm sorry if we can't get to yours. Feel free to write Global Cleveland, and we can connect you to a person who can answer your questions at a later time. However, okay, the first question we have here is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions of the OPT application process, and what are your responses to them? How do you dispel the myths?
Very, very good question. Myth, as we all know, why is always very difficult to dispel. For example, we provide the PowerPoint that you just kind of that I skimmed through. Is something that is available to students at any given time. They can go to our website. They put in their ID and password. They can download this. So they have access to this from the first day that they are basically a student. Now, of course, how many of them actually really take time to look at it? That is probably the $1 million question. We also provide workshops throughout every semester, group workshops, for students that it's just interested in just getting more information. For example, if they don't want to go through the PowerPoint, we have workshops, that in-person workshops, that they can actually get that same information. Beyond that, we also have very specific calendars, or I should say appointments set aside for OPT question only. So individuals that have more in-depth question. For example, one of the most common question for students, is especially students that have completed another degree, like within the US usually, right? And they are here now at CSU as a grad student, so they want to know whether are they eligible again or not. So then we have to go back and look at basically whether did they use the previous, or we have a PhD student. So those are some of the kind of common questions. And also the other very, very common question is when they should start their OPT. Now, that is, of course, a trickier question to answer because the regulation allows up to 60 days of grace period upon the official graduation date. And so that is a lot of times an individual decision because they can start their OPT, or they can request to start their OPT anytime within that 60 days from the official graduation date. So they can start the very next day, day 1 right after graduation, or they can start day 60. We normally say don't start don't pick the very, very end. It's very risky because it's a request, right? If it's not approved by the 60th day, then you may be in trouble. So those are some of the, I would say, common questions that students will have in general. And then, of course, there are some a little more complicated, usually about the field of studies and what type of jobs or what kind of position it's they can take. But those are more individual, and that's usually when the individual appointment comes in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very detailed. I appreciate it. The second question we have here is, do you know what percentage of international students at CSU end up participating in OPT programs?
I would say at this point, it's almost 90%, if not more.
So it's almost a natural continuation of their international education experience for the most part.
For the most part, yes. Yeah, because like I say, it is a status or a benefit, right? That's what Department of Homeland Security classify it. It's a benefit for app students. So I always say it's a benefit. So why not use it?
Now, I have a follow-up question to that. Were the numbers ever lower than 90% before, and what effort was put in by the university or by yourself even to raise those percentage points?
Well, at this point, I would say that for Cleveland State now, I mean, that number has always been rather high. Now, at other institutions that I've worked at, there are, of course, times where that number is not that high. And for example, right, there are a number of private institutions that I worked at where the number were only about 50%. And there are, of course, a lot of reasons. One of them, of course, is that students are returning home to work for their parents or student, or if you have a lot of times a lot of high volume of sponsored or government-sponsored students, then a lot of times they are required to return home. So they are the one that will not be using OPT. So, for example, just the previous institution that I was at, the institution has an aviation program and has a contract on agreement with the Saudi Airlines. They get about 100 to 200 students every year, and every single one of them must return immediately, right? Because they're going back to be pilots. So therefore none of them will exercise or will be applying for the OPT.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I'm glad that the percentage is so high at CSU. The third question we have here is, can someone apply for 3 years of OPT immediately, or is that amount of time only available as an extension?
Very good question. The quick answer is no. Yeah, so the students must apply for what is called the initial or post-completion OPT, which is just 12 months. Everybody is the same. And then there are criteria. If they are within the STEM field that meets the CEP or zip code, if you want to know what CIP stands for, it stands for Classification of Institutional Programs Code. It's a code that is managed by the National Center for Education Statistics, NACE, which is part of the Ministry of Department of Education. And so, there is, every degree program has a zip code, and so it must meet that STEM, at least the zip code that Department of Homeland Security has a list, and you can get this online. If you Google it, it will come up. They have a list of all the zip code that qualifies for the STEM OPT extension. And so if the students, it's part of that, then they can apply for the extension. And this is again, it's information that we provide to all our students. They are required to do that 6 months before their OPT expires. And another criteria to qualify besides the zip code is that the employer must be an E-verified employer. And
Okay.
requirement is by Homeland Security, not by us. I always say we don't make the rules. We are just the messenger and the one that that is that unfortunately a lot of times have to abide and follow the rules.
I think this feeds well into the next question as to who makes the determination that the employment option is directly related to the field of study. Is that also done through the Department of Education, or is it also done through the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, so that is normally so this is the it's a very, very tricky part. Actually, it's a very, very good question. The answer is a lot complicated than on the surface, right? So I'll give you kind of the quick general view of how it is looked at. So we provide that. So this is one of those regulations where it's in the hands of the individual. So here I will use the word student, where it's the student that's responsible. So this is information that, like say, we provide to the student, and the regulation holds the student responsible in making sure that the job that they take on is related to their field of studies. Now, if it's not, and there's no intention of going forward into H-1B, so on and so forth, then yeah, an individual may get away with it. But if there is plan for an H-1B, that, and also remember earlier about the last slide, I indicate that they have to continue to report the employer name, address, information, and so that is when it will pop up that the job. Well, you have a degree in information system. Why are you working at National Rent-A-Car, right? So what is the relation? So if there is, then yeah, you move on. If not, then that's when the H-1B may get rejected at that point.
Okay, thank you for that. A question just came in about a comment that you recently made about e-verification. Do you have any information on how an employer can become e-verified or can get qualified for this?
Yeah, actually, personally, I have not done it, right? Because I'm not an employer. So I have not personally gone through this process, but you can actually Google, and there is actually a form. It's part, again, it's part of Department of Homeland Security and with in tandem with Labor Department that has this e-verify system. Basically, there are a couple of ways of getting this e-verify. I mean, one, I would say that the most basic criteria for e-verify is that you have to apply and get approved to be an e-verify employer. Basically, but what it really requires an e-verify employer to do is that you will actually verify the employment status of every employee. So basically, you are declaring to the federal government that you will make sure that every employee at your company has, is legitimate to work or has all the correct authorization to work in the US. And so e-verify can be approved strictly by an individual department within an organization, or it can be an organization or company-wide e-verification. So it can act as both. So if the company in general don't want to apply for e-verification for the entire company, an individual department can actually do that.
Oh, wow. That's detailed. Now, for everyone watching, we will find this information or the form, and we will send it out after the webinar is finished. And thank you, CK, for explaining that. There's another question on here. What are the roles of the employer for the student to get EAD, and how difficult is it for employers to hire students in OPT? So through OPT, is it a difficult process for the employer? Or what is the employer side of this application process or hiring process?
So actually, it's really, really easy for an employer to hire someone with an EAD because there's nothing you need to do besides hiring like anyone else that you would hire. The entire burden, if I'm going to use that word, so the entire application of the process of obtaining the EAD is on the student because it is classified as a benefit to an F1 holder, right? An F1 visa holder, which is here the student. So the entire process of obtaining the EAD is on the individual student. The employer really doesn't have to do anything, with the exception of, like I say, once you, in fact, you don't have to do anything until you make that offer and you want the person to start, right? So part of the I-19 process to verify all the documents, documentation of the individual that you hire, that is actually when you want to actually make sure that you see that the individual has the EAD or the EAD card, the employment authorization document.
Wonderful. So if an employee, so the student, let's say, gets all of their documents in a row, then once the employer offers the job, that's the only point at which they even need to worry about OPT application processes, etc.
No, we normally have students apply for OPT before they graduate.
Okay.
Because
they can apply
because that process, doesn't, can take up to a couple of months, right? Because it's sent to USCIS and then it sits there and we don't know how long, it's going to take for an individual. We have seen it as quickly as 2 weeks.
Wow.
Now, we have also seen it take more than 4 months. So, yeah, so it's very difficult to predict.
Wonderful. There is a question on here, another one. We have time for a couple more questions. Thank you for being so efficient and quick, Dr. C.K. Kwai. We really appreciate it. Can I travel while my OPT application is pending? I believe there was a slide on this.
Mm-hmm. The quick answer is yes. The more accurate answer is yes. It depends, on a number of things. Whether you still have a valid, whether the individual still has a valid F1 visa, and then they are going to be supporting documents that will be required. So an example will be they need to make sure that the I-24 OPT, so there's a separate I-20 that must be issued for OPT. That particular I-20 is signed, has a travel authorization signature on it. And that will be by the home university, designated school official. And then, of course, the valid visa, the EAD card alone is not, but it has to, because the EAD card will now demonstrate that the individual has been approved for OPT. And we also then recommend that the employer provide the individual with a letter confirming employment, because the student, in order for the student to come back into the US after graduation, they must have a reason, and employment is a possible reason to come back to the US.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think this will be our final question. How does CSU help employers to understand the process of hiring international students?
So we do webinars like this to reach out to employers. Our Career and Development Center also has, also try to get employers together and educate and provide information to employers. So I get invited to talk to employers occasionally, depending on how many sign up and things like that. So so we try to outreach to the community, but of course we also have students that are being employed and moved out of Northeast Ohio, unfortunately, right? And so so there are also always going to be employers that is outside of this region.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, Dr. CK Kwai, CK, thank you so much. Dr. Holcomb, thank you also for taking part. It was very informative. This webinar is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel for everyone who wants to rewatch it or ask any questions in the comments on our YouTube channel, or feel free to reach out to us at Global Cleveland. I just want to thank you both again for taking part, and CK, thank you for all of the wonderful information. I think it helped answer a lot of questions. I want to also thank our sponsors again: SwageLock, Team Neo, Brown Immigration Law, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, Clockwork 9, and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. I just want to remind everyone in the audience, thank you again for joining us today. Our third Global Employer Series webinar is scheduled for 12 noon to 1 p.m. on Wednesday, May 11th, and that will be on the topic of the various types of work visas for international folk here in the region and across Ohio. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Global Cleveland, reach out to me. I'm the program director at Zachary@globalcleveland.org. And if you want to just look up any more information, feel free to look at our website, globalcleveland.org. Thank you so much again, and we will see you on May 11th.